In today's episode, we want to talk about one of the most important aspects of the sales process, procurement. We're going to visit some of the areas on how you can prepare for the RFP, what should be disclosed, the pitch, what can go wrong, what can go right, and then finally wrap up with the contracting process. And today I'm joined by Chris Smith, CEO of OPIN, and Chris Fenn, Sales Executive at OPIN. So guys, I've got you here. Where do we start?
Hey, Ryan, absolutely. I just want to say I've been working with procurement officers for 15 years in my career, and I've been dreaming of doing a podcast like this for most of it. You see a lot of trends in the industry. You see a lot of interesting RFPs cross your desk over, such a long period of time. And I think a podcast like this can bring a lot of value to a procurement officer or someone that's looking to buy within our space, right? If you're looking to procure a website or an intranet or basically anything digital these days, I'm hoping that this podcast is going to be helpful for them. So this is like a dream come true for me. So thanks for putting this together.
Absolutely. And we're lucky to have you both. So I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say on this topic. So this is going to be great for me as well.
Great. So, Ryan, to kick things off, I want to talk about the preparation step because just like a presentation, preparation is key to a successful RFP. And really, when we're talking about preparation, what I'm referring to here is really that research phase, that initial, stakeholder outreach that every procurement officer should do at that point where the organization has said, okay, we need a new website, we need an intranet, whatever the project might be. The question that we really need to ask at that point is, who is this project going to impact? Who are the stakeholders that want to have a voice and need to be heard in order to truly capture the objectives and the requirements of the project? And the reason why I think that that's so important is because there's nothing worse than being in the middle of a design or a development project and you've accidentally missed the feedback or the opinion of a whole stakeholder group. And now that they've come forward and they're sharing their thoughts and they've learned the project, it creates a huge impediment. You have to kind of go back, you have to redesign, you have to collect their feedback at that moment. You can really put a project at risk in terms of success. And so, my biggest tip is that very, very early on, before we even start writing the RFP, is to really conduct thorough research and to make sure to capture all the details from those different stakeholder groups that'll be involved. Now, one of the things that I always get a good kick out of and I get a laugh about is when you see an RFP that's been written, but not really written, more copy and pasted. What I mean is, you're working with university A, B, and C, and they've sent you an RFP for their big project, and you catch a typo where maybe they forgot to delete the other university's name that they copied the RFP from. Maybe there's just, you're working on a Canadian RFP and there's American spelling throughout the document. There are these little indicators when you read enough of these RFPs, and you can really start to see a pattern between the organizations that have done that research and really written a custom request for proposal for their organization versus those that may have cut a few corners and, in cutting corners, maybe copy and pasted someone else's RFP, maybe forgot to go through that copy and pasted document and make it their own. And so the reason I think, copy and pasting, like, don't get me wrong, I have no qualms against efficiency, but I think the reason why copy and pasting or borrowing an RFP from another organization could be a mistake is that often I think that in an effort to become more efficient, what we're doing is we're forgetting to do the research stage. We're forgetting to customize the RFP. We're more just checking the box in terms of, I need to get an RFP out the door, rather than really taking the time to make sure that the RFP meets the objectives and the requirements of the organization. So for me, the copy and pasting is a big no-no, and doing extensive research before even starting to write would probably be something that I would encourage all organizations to do.
Especially in terms of a website project, these are projects that impact every aspect of an organization. So I think your point about research, internal research and consultation is really quite quite accurate, because this is an area, it's not only the expression of an organization's vision and through design and user experience, but it's also got some functional and technical requirements that are going to impact everything from end users right up to the executive level, and how they communicate with outside organizations and how they pursue their business requirements. So it's really important to have a good understanding of the stakeholders who are going to be impacted and what voices need to be at the table to be able to really well articulate your vision to the proponents who will be receiving the RFP. And I think your point as well about the copy paste function really strikes a nerve, because sometimes you'll see even certain requirements get copied over, or you can tell that certain people have been in communication with people in the same industry and they've brought over requirements, but that might not be relevant to that organization. I can think of some specific, security level requirements that might be appropriate for one organization, but might not be relevant to a third organization. And by including those requirements, you may be unduly excluding some really great partners that you want to work with, or platform options.
Absolutely. And to add to that, you see from time to time, and I guess if you spend enough time in this industry, you do know that a vendor may provide, I'm going to air quote here, guidance in terms of how to write your RFP, right? The vendor or a vendor within the space may suggest certain verbiage. They might suggest including certain requirements, like Chris is referring to, like extensive security requirements. I've even seen in certain cases, vendors will suggest, hey, just use our RFP template. It'll really help you get through this planning process a lot quicker if you just use our pre-canned RFP. And, again, it could be extremely tempting from an efficiency standpoint. Well, yeah, if I use that RFP, I could save, several days of research and writing. But at the same time, just be mindful that that advice is probably got a bit of a bias to it. If you're looking at your vendor or your supplier for that RFP document, they've probably included a few requirements in there that are going to sway the opportunity into their favor and give them a competitive edge. Could even go as far as to disqualify other competitors in the space. And at the end of the day, because we're trying to get as many qualified vendors as possible to submit a bid on our RFP, we certainly don't want to be doing that either. So I think, Ryan, those are some of my tips from some of the things I've seen when it comes to preparing the RFP. Chris, what are your thoughts when the preparation is over about what should be disclosed? I hear that question coming up often, especially with procurement officers saying, what should I show? What shouldn't I show? Should we disclose the budget? Should we not disclose the budget? What are your thoughts around that?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because I have lots of thoughts about this, and I think there's a lot of different ways you can come at this question. And I think for me, the best way to start is with the mindset of an organization, and I think that's the best way to approach when you're writing an RFP or writing a document that you're going to deliver to many potential proponents for a project. And I think you want to start with this understanding of, how do you view the people who are going to be working on this project? Do you view them as potential partners in accomplishing a business objective for your organization? Or do you see them as potential adversaries who may not have the competence that you want, or may be trying to sell you something that you don't want, or you're slightly suspicious of? And I think that there's a lot of very traditional or old mindsets in procurement that sometimes linger and have become a little bit outdated, because I think in today's world, and I think many procurement and people involved in supply chain and those kind of professions recognize that to be truly successful, you need to find someone who you can truly partner with. And I think that spirit of transparency and disclosure comes through in how you write your RFP. The more you want to share with your organizations that might potentially want to partner with you, the more precise, the more strategic, the more targeted, the more relevant their advice can come back. And I think one of the big questions is always, probably the top of the list is always budget, right? So when do you disclose budget? And there's a lot of traditional thinking in procurement around, you should never disclose budget, because if you do, all that's going to happen is your proponents are just going to come up with some solution that's going to be right under your budget, and they may be overcharging you for something. They may be trying to pad it, and you just want to find out what the best value in the market is. And it's interesting because I've done some research, and the government of the UK did some analysis of this, and they actually provided guidance to their organizations about when they should disclose budget. And I don't think it's a question of you should never or you should always. I think you need to understand the context. And in what we're talking about, these very complex projects that involve different kinds of services that have different approaches and different options, these are prime examples of where you should be disclosing your budget, because there are technology and platform options that can provide a gold-plated experience, but that comes with a gold-plated price. And you may not, it might meet all of your wildest dreams, but in the end, if you can't afford it and you don't have the budget for it, you're really wasting everybody's time. So I think in those situations, there are examples where it's really great to provide a budget or a budget range that your proponent should be looking at as they try and come up with the best solutions for you. And I think, areas where there's a product that's very standardized, that has very few options, that is well established in the market, those are areas where you might not want to release a budget, because we know that prices for product X are very established and bound. There are very few options to consider. You may want to withhold that. But in these kind of projects, I think it really worth your time to disclose that kind of information.
Chris, I wanted to ask you, so you're looking at RFPs all of the time in your role at the company, and when the budget isn't disclosed, what kind of assumptions or questions are you asking? Because I assume you're trying to derive a ballpark. You're trying to figure out that budget even when it's not said. So what kind of exercise do you do? What steps do you do? And then, how accurate is that at the end of the day?
Well, and I think you said it exactly right. You're forced to make assumptions, right? And we all know how precise our assumptions can be sometimes. So, for example, you're looking at what's the size of the organization? What's the size of the audience that they're trying to reach? What are some other technologies that we know that they're using that they could leverage for a possible solution? What have they done in the past? Have we seen them move in the market and in their activities in the past? What are some of the requirements? Does it suggest they have an understanding of what the costs are involved, right? Like, how sophisticated are the requirements? You're looking at things like that, little hints here and there about what they might be able to accommodate. It's funny. One of the short, fast rule is, how long is the RFP? Is the RFP, 30 pages with detailed requirements? Well, they've done a lot of effort into detailing and scoping, and they have a good understanding of the market. If it's 5 pages, they may not have such a good understanding, or their budget might be more limited. So there's a lot of little hints, but they're never perfect, right?
It's pretty funny to think that the length of the RFP document itself leads you to make assumptions about how much money the organization wants to spend in their financial budget on this project. But I think you hit the nail on the head, right? We're making assumptions here whenever information is not being disclosed, and those assumptions could lead to a lot of inaccuracies or mistakes, and could lead an organization down the wrong path.
The other thing I wanted to mention is, in terms of advice for people who are designing their RFP, you want to make sure you understand the broad objectives of your organization. What is the business goal you want to achieve? And what does the organization want to do that matches its strategic mission? And then you want to have some information, very detailed information about what your expectations are. But I want to caution as well, you don't want to be too prescriptive. And what I mean by that is, you don't want to just to detail to such a degree that you will exclude the opportunity for people to offer an innovative solution or a different approach. You don't want to say something like, you need to offer this particular piece of technology, and that's the only thing we're ever going to look at. And if you can't provide that, then, or this methodology, then we don't want to look at it. You want to be broad enough that you leave the space for innovation and different approaches, things that you haven't thought of. If you're overly prescriptive, you're going to get a very reactive response from proponents. They're just going to give you what you asked for. You may be missing opportunities that proponents who have strategic value, business insight, have worked with other people in the space and can maybe challenge some of your assumptions. You want to give space for that too, to entertain new ideas.
It's funny you say that, Chris, because I was just thinking on this side here, I was thinking, be as prescriptive as you can be. But now that I hear your opinion, I'm starting to see both sides of the coin. And I mean, from my perspective, often I'm asked for my technical opinion about what's the solution going to look like and what's the best technical approach we should take. And I never get I've never rolled my eyes so hard as when you read an RFP and they'll just provide you with one bullet point and will say must integrate with our internal business systems, right? Probably the most ambiguous, broad requirement that you can see in a software development project, whether it's websites or anything else. And I say that because this is your very typical kind of example requirement, and it leads you down this whole assumption path where you start asking, well, what are these business systems? How many business systems? What kind of integration and what depth of integration? And how many engineering hours are we really going to have to spend doing this? And has anyone even done it before? Sometimes you don't even know what programming language or what system you're being asked to integrate with. And so I think that, to your point about not being very prescriptive in some areas, I also think that there are areas where if you have very specific expectations, like integration with a business system, those are probably the areas where you do want to be very prescriptive and very detailed, right?
I agree. And I think the difference is you want to be as forthcoming about your own constraints, but maybe not prescriptive in your approach. So what I mean by that is the internal systems is a great example, because you might want to say, let's say you use Salesforce as your CRM, that's something that you are not going to change, or you're not looking at changing in any time in the future. So you want to be very upfront about saying, our CRM is Salesforce. We would like to be able to perform these functions in Salesforce, and it needs to integrate seamlessly in a way that's user-friendly, that our data analysts can capture the information, our end users or support customer service persons can effectively do their job. But you might not necessarily need to prescribe an approach to make that happen. You want to understand the outcome and the constraints that you have, but not necessarily how to get there.
So Chris, let's say that you've made all the right assumptions, and you and your team have prepared a written response and a quote and submitted to the organization, and they're thinking, you know what, this company really understands us. Let's bring them in for a presentation. It's typically the next step, right? In our industry, is to come in and do the famous pitch, right? The marketing agency pitch, where you stand at the front of the room and you explain to them all of your amazing concepts and ideas and so on. So maybe we can just take a couple minutes and talk about that pitch experience. And from your perspective, having done now probably over 100 of these pitches, how do you get the most value out of the pitch? How does the organization truly benefit from a pitch? Because isn't everything just written in the RFP anyways?
Yeah, that's a great point. And we get invited a lot to do these pitch presentations, and I would say it runs the gamut. Sometimes the organization just says, "Hey, you know what? We want to spend an hour with you. Come and show us what you got." And other times you'll get a 3-page document that details exactly how they want you, they want you to do, what they want to show you. What I would say in terms of advice for an organization is think really hard about what kind of value you want to get from that experience. You have an RFP response that tells you who the company is, how long they've been in business, who their clients are, who their references are, what technologies they use. So you don't necessarily want to have to regurgitate all that in a presentation, because I think the underlying goal is that you want to actually get a sense of who these people are as individuals and as a team, and do they fit the culture of your organization? Do you think that they have an alignment in how you think about technology and how they think about technology? Do they come up with innovative ideas about how to solve certain problems? So my suggestion is that think really hard about what's the value that you need to get out of that. Do you want to make sure that you validate their technical expertise? So in that case, a demo might be a great thing to call them in for, and ask them to show you how they would approach certain questions. Or if you have hesitations about the underlying technology, get them to show you. Or if you want to just understand, how would you solve a certain problem? Less like more interactive and less like a one-way pitch where I'm going to just tell you about our company's history and here are the fantastic projects we did and this is our methodology. How would you solve this problem? What's your approach to addressing some of the problems we've had in the past? And that'll get you a really good insight into how that company is thinking, how they're thinking about you, how they value their ongoing relationships.
With the demo, Chris, I'm always surprised by how many people will actually go direct award. They'll read the RFP, they'll read the price, they'll say, okay, this looks like a solid fit. Let's go ahead and make that purchase. And, they're basically spending the same amount as a small house, right? A small detached family home these days. And they're going ahead and doing that without even meeting the team, without seeing the product, just kind of blindly trusting everything that's written in the RFP. I think, is it fair to say that in procurement, you should always meet the team, get to know them, look at the product, do a proper evaluation, use that pitch as that way to do that?
I would encourage that. Definitely. I think that can avoid a lot of problems that come up with, lack of culture fit, let's say, of two organizations. I mean, it's not always given that these two organizations are going to work well together or they understand the ultimate goals. So I think it's a great idea to get a sense of the organizations. And I think the funny thing about the demo is, we use Drupal as an open source technology that's used by, thousands of organizations in the world. And I always think about the value of a demo when we're asked to demo what Drupal can do, versus how do we approach the implementation of Drupal, let's say. And I think that's a big difference. I don't think there's a lot of value in us just showing that, Drupal has a WYSIWYG editor. Like, anyone who has Drupal knows that it does and can show you. But what you want to do is, how do you make the editing experience easy and intuitive for people with not necessarily technical expertise? Well, this is how we train people. This is how we approach the interface. This is how we implement, your business requirements. That's much better. That'll tell you much better about an organization's as a valuable partner than necessarily just that it's a yes or no question. Those you can put in a requirements grid, right?
Absolutely. Ryan's giving me the wrap up face right now. He's kind of doing that thing with his finger that but I did want to just touch on one last part before we wrap up kind of this conversation. I think you guys can tell I am passionate about this. I love this topic. I really want to just talk about contracting. Now, contracting is probably where I spend a large portion of my week, contracting and contracting negotiations with organizations. I joke with my family all the time that although I went to business school, I probably should have been a lawyer. Contracting is, of course, the end of the process. You've selected the organization that you think is the best fit, is capable of delivering this project successfully. And now you just need to put together the T's and C's, your terms and conditions that are going to govern that relationship, and really just kind of plan out how it is that you're going to see this project through to completion. And I just wanted to take a minute to just talk to two quick points on this. And the first is, I'm always surprised by the number of organizations that do not read the contract's terms and conditions. So when your provider provides you with the T's and C's, it often outlines how that organization does business. It answers important questions like the fee model. Are we talking about time and materials? Are we talking about a fixed price contract? Is it time and materials will not exceed? How will we deal with complications or conflicts when they arise? How will we deal with resource changes or postponements in the project? All of these types of things are outlined in the terms and conditions, especially within our industry in digital marketing and communications. These contracts, they really do show how the relationship should and is expected to function, the business relationship. And so I would suggest that when doing contracting, if you're working with the vendors' terms and conditions, is making sure that everyone involved in the project manager, the coordinator, the procurement officers, everyone fully understands what those terms and conditions are. And then the second, of course, is what if you're working with your own terms and conditions? You're providing the vendor with T's and C's. And now in this example, what I would suggest is just be open-minded that when working with a vendor, they may have an innovative approach. They may be bringing their own intellectual property to the table. They may be working, like in our example, with open source software. And so there are limitations to what they can do in terms of indemnifications and warranties and things like that. And so just because we're starting with the T's and C's of our organization doesn't mean that we need to be fixed on them. There's nothing worse, in my opinion, than working with an organization, going through a detailed procurement, being selected as the chosen proponent, but then having no flexibility or wiggle room in the contract preparation, and then all of a sudden you just can't get an alignment. Or there's a lack of I guess an alignment, a contractual or legal alignment about how that relationship will work. And so you have to part ways and the procurement process starts over. So I guess being open-minded when using your own T's and C's and working with that vendor to establish a mutual agreement, something that's mutually beneficial, is probably going to serve you really well. The second point, and then the last point I'll make, and then Ryan's truly going to cut me off here, is just around fixed price versus time and materials, or, you know, time and materials will not exceed. And what I'm really referring to here is the fee model that you choose to use in this project. Now, I come from a software development, software engineering background, and in my previous career, our requirement documents and our RFP documents were hundreds of pages long, and the requirements for those projects were extremely well developed and very clear and very prescriptive and very precise. And we were expected at that time to provide a fixed price agreement. And in fairness, we were able to, and with a high degree of accuracy. Our engineering team was able to sit down and review each of those highly detailed requirements and come up with an accurate estimate, which then resulted in a very accurate timeline and quote. And in those cases where the details and the requirements are so detailed and so explicitly defined, I think fixed price is a very great model. It's a great model for the buyer, for you as the procurement officer, because effectively it's an insurance policy. You will not pay any more than what has been agreed to by both parties, and you will get exactly the scope of work that you've laid out. But one thing I've recognized being in this digital communication marketing space now for quite some time is often most organizations don't have that detail of an understanding of their project. They have more of a broad understanding. They know roughly the objectives they're looking to accomplish. And, you know, they might say things like, I need an integration with a business system, or I need an event calendar, but they don't really have that extremely detailed understanding of, well, how will that calendar work? Or what are the underlying technologies in that integration, for example? And so you end up in this procurement scenario where the requirements themselves are quite broad, and the sales teams are making a lot of assumptions, right? And as Chris Fenn just said, you're looking at, well, how long is this RFP, right? Like in terms of page length, to determine what we think is a reasonable budget from time to time. What level of detail did they go into? Do we think that they're a digitally mature organization? Those types of questions are being asked. And as you can imagine, because of those assumptions, it's inevitable that the accuracy of the timelines and the estimates is just going to be lower. It's just naturally going to happen. And in these cases, and mostly in our industry, I would highly recommend a time and materials agreement. It's the model that our company has followed for 10 years and has done really well with. And in time and materials, what it does is it recognizes, both parties are recognizing that there will be unknowns, there will be changes to this project, to the scope. We're going to learn as we go. And what it does is it does give you a model that allows you to adapt to change quickly. And it doesn't mean unlimited budget. Some people will say, well, we can't just spend, you know, every dollar we have. Absolutely not. But it does allow you a model that is more adaptable, more agile, more flexible. And you also don't end up in a world of change orders, issuing change order after change order after change order, as every time you want to change a requirement like you would in a fixed price contract. So, you know, from my preference, or from my opinion, I think that contracting is really important, understanding the T's and C's, and then most of all, choosing a proper fee structure that really aligns with the requirements and the nature of the work. And I do believe time and materials within our industry is probably the best fit.
The only thing I would add to that, and I think that's perfect articulation of kind of the different sides of the equation in terms of the pricing and the fee model, is how do we define as well? You mentioned that there's, you know, these projects start with some broad requirements or broad outcomes that we want to achieve. How do we define completion, right? A lot of times it starts out with, we want an easy to use, modern, friendly website, right? How do we define that, you know, contractually? How do we define when we're complete and to whose specification? How do we make it not subjective, but both parties can look objectively and say, yes, we've completed this project and that we've met the business requirements and that we're all happy with the outcome.
That's a great point. You always need to know what your exit plan is, right? Great.
Speaking of exit plans, this has been a great talk today. And like I said, this is one of the most important, if not the most important part of a sales process. You guys really nailed it with how to remain flexible and innovative. And you really did discuss how everybody can get more out of this process in general. And at the end of the day, you are going through a documentation process and getting buy-in from stakeholders and going through the board, and this really does help make the most out of the procurement process. So thank you guys for coming in. Really appreciate your insights. I know this has been a long time coming, so I'm really glad to get you guys together and speak on this. So I welcome back anytime. If you guys have any other topics, you make tons of great episodes for this feature. So thank you very much both for being here.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Appreciate the chance to rant about procurement. I love it. All
Anytime.
Right.
All right.
Have a good one, guys. See ya.
Bye.